Hey everyone, my name is Janice and welcome back to my channel. I will be reviewing all of the books that I read in the month of August. In total, I read 7, or I finished 7. I have gotten out of control with how many books I have started. So I did start but not finish Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. Maybe I'll finish it today or tomorrow. I'm not entirely sure, but started it, didn't finish it in August. And I almost finished my Latin American book challenge pick for the months of August and September, which is La Fiesta del Chivo. I got to page 402, so I have a little over 100 pages left. I was really hoping to finish it in August, but it's fine. I have just a little bit more, you can see. Yeah, so let's just begin with the books I did finish, and just so you can see a little visual of the books that I own that I finished, starting with my least favorite of the month. Unfortunately, it is State of Paradise by Laura Vandenberg, which was released a little bit earlier this summer. When I was reading this, I found this to be a combination of a few books. Our Wives Under the Sea, mixed with Pew, mixed with Leave the World Behind, and also a little bit of Untold Night and Day. A surrealist mashup. And in structure, in these meandering kind of vignettes, it reminded me of a book that I loved that I read earlier this year called Activities of Daily Living. So I read a lot of reviews that were a little bit taken aback by this novel's turn into the sci-fi. I didn't find it as jarring as other people, mainly because one, I read these reviews and anticipated the sci-fi, but also I know Laura Vandenberg's writing already pretty well, and she tends to do this anyway, so I didn't really find it jarring. I expected the unsettling, and so beneath the surface of the story here, we look a lot at the concepts of ghosts. We go from ghost writing, our narrator is a ghost writer, supernatural beings, figurative symbols of change, which ghosts in their own way can be. The plot and the setting take the truths of the pandemic, like anxiety, isolation, memory, uncertainty, and shows us how fiction can extricate meaning out of all of those things, and also project those anxieties and uncertainties onto the very environment. So the environment here is behaving erratically. There is a sci-fi element to it that I don't want to necessarily reveal, but the weather doesn't totally make sense. I thought the book would be damp, as the blurb or the flap copy said it would. I didn't find it as creepy or damp as I wanted it to be. One thing that's interesting, though, a concept that it explores, is pilgrims as immigrants and voyagers into the unknown, and kind of comparing that to all of us in the pandemic. Did we all in our own way become immigrants into the unknown when we faced the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020? The writing here is matter of fact, a little bit removed, almost like the narrator is still experiencing trauma. So overall, the novel was thought-provoking in its own way. Florida is a perfect setting for tumultuous weather and atmosphere and mood, so great choice. It's also Laura Vandenberg, so she will inevitably write about Florida, but ultimately I just was kind of expecting more out of this. You will get really well constructed sentences, a slightly odd vibe and mood, but plot-wise the story didn't really move much for me, so ultimately I gave it 2 stars. Next up, I gave 2.5 stars to Mystery Lights by Lena Valencia. This is a short story collection. It has 10 short stories. Each of these features a woman threatened by people, by the environment, by men, especially by their work. This did kind of the impossible. It was both literary but also genre fiction, which often you either get like a very plot-heavy genre commercial work or a more of a meandering character study that's more literary fiction. But this blended both, I thought, pretty well. Each story kept me interested. Each was unique. I mean, listen to some of the summaries of the stories. An influencer attempts to derail a viral TV marketing campaign with her violent cult following. A marriage between two ghost hunters is threatened when one of them loses her ability to see spirits. The lives of a famous painter in the twilight of her career and a teenage UFO enthusiast converge when a mysterious glowing orb appears in their small desert town, etc., etc. The opening story, Dogs, is really good on suspense. A woman gets into the car of a stranger who then starts acting very weird. And they're stranded in the middle of the desert. These are beguiling, a little horrific, sci-fi influenced, obviously. The one thing that I didn't really find here was cohesion. I felt like aside from women under threat and the terror of that, I didn't find like the stories made sense together. It didn't feel like a collection. It just seems like a bunch of stories that Lena had written and then they published it into a collection. But this would be a great collection to read in October. It definitely fits the horror theme of the month. I also gave 2.5 stars to Lady in the Lake, which I've already pretty much reviewed in my book to TV series comparison. I thought this was a little bit superficial. It's kind of like a gesturing towards the issues in 1960s Baltimore for women, in particular Jewish women, and also the Black community, but in very broad strokes, I felt. The mystery was really interesting, so I did stop reading and immediately want to jump back in and figure out what was going on. It didn't totally pay off for me in the end. The writing was smooth enough that, you know, it was overall not a wholly underwhelming, terrible reading experience. Then I gave 3.5 stars to my big book challenge of the month of August, which was Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. This won the National Book Critics Circle Award, and this is astoundingly clear-sighted, impeccably researched, well-written, focused, and honest, but overall just incredibly sad to read. Shocking things are uncovered here through her research. Just to name a few, we learn about a South African doctor who essentially poisoned people, and also another doctor who did pleasure experiments on many people of many races, but just conveniently targeted Black men, not just for their race, but for their sexuality. So there's physical torture here, there is psychological experimentation and abuse. It is very much a history of medicine. I would consider Washington a historian. The only thing I would say is that it is very large in scope. This could have been a kind of physical torture half, like I mentioned, and also psychological horror half, or just 2 separate books. She doesn't leave anything uncovered or undiscussed, so she wants to be very thorough, but in that sometimes I kind of lost my way a little bit. But she does bring forth really, really crucial conversation topics, like the ethics of medical experimentation, of consent, and also of the value of medical experiments, where oftentimes Black people or marginalized people are used to greenlight the drug or the equipment or something, and then once it's approved, they're the very ones who can't afford to use said drug or equipment. So really challenges all aspects of the medical field. So I gave it 3.5 stars. Some of the science did get a little over my head. You know, it's extremely fact heavy and accurate, but overall just a rewarding and harrowing read. Then I gave 3.5 stars. I gave a lot of 3.5 stars this month. I gave it to The Audacity of Hope, Thoughts on Reclaiming the American Dream by former President Barack Obama. I do admire him as an intellectual and everything, and I have read now all of his books, except his children's books. I admire him a lot, and I find a lot of similarities with him, which I know sounds like really self-aggrandizing. Like, I am so similar to one of the most powerful men on the planet. But genuinely, in terms of interest and ideology, I think he's very inspiring, at least to me. I know not to everyone, but to me. So I will read pretty much anything that he writes, and I will say this is not as engaging as Dreams of My Father, Dreams from My Father. I can never get that right, but we do still have the really beautiful literary sentences. He easily could have been like a writer, not just of nonfiction, but of fiction if he wanted to. Lots of his sentences are packed with literary turns of phrase, metaphors, and all of that good stuff for all of you English literature students. But aside from that, of course, we do get his views on politics and why we are in the state that we are in. Granted, this was written in 2006 or published in 2006. I really liked reading these sections on foreign policy and the Constitution. I liked it when it got very, very political. The parts that I didn't love so much were the ones on faith and race, which shocked me because I thought I would like the race chapter. I feel like some of his views were, today, they seem just a little bit outdated. He kind of talks a lot about young black men and the youth sex culture. That just sounds a little bit like, oh, grandpa's talking now, he's mad at all the youth, you know. So I didn't love those chapters, and I don't know if he would necessarily say the things that he said here today. But overall, I thought this was really thought-provoking. I read it slowly, and I also read it with, sadly, an abridged audiobook, but an audiobook nonetheless read by Obama. And he's, of course, a fantastic orator and speaker, so yeah, it was a worthwhile experience. So ultimately, I gave it 3.5 stars. And then my short story collection of the month of August was a great collection. I gave it 3.5, kind of like 3.75 stars. I gave it to Emergency by Kathleen Alcott. I've read a few of her stories, or had read them prior to meeting this book, so I know her fluid and lucid but floral style is just admirable, and I wish I wrote like this myself. But it's, you know, beyond the wow, her vocabulary is so incredible, but also just the insights that she can weave out of ordinary words and observations. She's incredible. Here we get a lot of short stories from women of differing ages, going through some sort of reckoning in their life, a moment of emergency, literal or figurative emergency, in friendships, in romantic relationships, in families, in marriages, in affairs. It spans geography, it spans class. One of the best short stories I've read all year was Temporary Housing, the very last short story. Remarkable. Just, I need to check out more of Kathleen Alcott. I know she's written some novels. I have one, Infinite Home, I think is by her. She's truly a remarkable writer, and this is one of my favorite collections of the year. And then lastly, to another favorite book of the year. It's actually a reread, and this author is definitely one of my favorite contemporary writers. I have read everything that she's written, and I look forward to book 3 in this particular series. This is The Idiot by Elif Batuman. Funnier than the first time, just so naturally humorous and sharp and witty, and Batuman's brain, when you read her, yes, it's the character who just can come up with all of these references and allusions to things, but you know it's also the writer. I felt the same way reading Salman Rushdie. Both the character, both the author are incredibly intelligent. Rereading it here, I did notice that the sections where Celine, the main character, is abroad, like when she's not at Harvard, were a little too long for me. Newsflash, I hate Ivan. I think he's trash. He thrives on confusion and blurry lines, and Celine wants clarity and understanding, and they don't match, and I just want to scream at Celine because she deserves so much better than this crazy gaslighter. And so when we do go abroad, he features heavily, and so it's not my favorite environment for Celine to be in, anywhere in proximity to Yvonne. Even with a character that I can't stand, you know, the cultural observations that seem so small and incidental, just what Batuman is able to do with them is a remarkable talent. One of my favorites of all time, one of my favorites of the year, even though it's a reread, and just if you haven't read this, the hype, believe the hype. If you like awkward writing about precocious young women who question the world and are kind of in doubt about what they want to do in life, this is for you. If you like languages, if you like immigrant stories, campus novels, but also like study abroad novels too, this is for you. Just check it out. Don't hesitate. Amazing. And with that, we close off August. I'm filming this September 2nd, so we're already well into the new month, and already I have 7 books that I'm reading. I'm a disaster. I don't know, my concentration is not where I want it to be, but crossing my fingers I get it together soon and can actually finish more books than I start in September. But you'll just have to wait for my wrap up to, you know, see if I actually manage to accomplish this. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I will see you all next time. Bye.